You can be lean and thin on the outside, but technically fat on the inside. You could walk around and people would never know that you're actually fat because you can look lean, but you have a lot of visceral fat. You see, subcutaneous fat is the fat that's just underneath our skin. It's the unsightly fat that we don't really like, but the thing is the subcutaneous fat, although annoying, isn't really all that dangerous from a hormonal standpoint. I mean, yes, in excess, definitely, but a little bit of sub-Q fat is not bad. It secretes good hormones. It secretes leptin. It secretes things that help encourage good sex drive and sex hormones. Okay, but visceral fat is the fat that is in our abdomen that we cannot see. And that is the fat that is dangerous, and that is the fat that could lead to more sub-Q fat later on. You see, here's the thing. That visceral fat is inside our abdominal cavity, and it's going to leak inflammatory cytokines. It's very inflammatory, which means that it leaks things that trigger inflammation. Now, it doesn't just leak them into the bloodstream, it leaks them into the portal vein of the bloodstream, which drains directly into the liver, which means that we have potentially inflammatory cytokines going right into the liver, which could instill some inflammation in us. But worst of all, that ends up setting the stage for metabolic distress. Okay, if you're draining a bunch of inflammation into the liver, then how is the liver able to process food and nutrients and actually do its job? The point is, it's dangerous stuff, and I want to teach you how you can target it. Now, the only reason that I know this stuff is simply because the research is out there, okay? I'm only providing this for informational purposes because I've seen the research and I think it needs to be out there. The only way that you can know if you have high levels of visceral fat is to go and get a DEXA scan, okay? Body fat calipers or body fat testing or bioimpedance scales aren't going to tell you. You need a DEXA scan that actually looks at you that way. Anyhow, how do we target it? Well, the first way is going to be via a low glycemic or low insulin diet. Now, I'm not trying to say that you need to do a ketogenic diet, okay? I'm careful not to say that in this video. The point is, any ways that you can limit insulin, you're going to have an improvement in visceral fat. So whether that be by doing a ketogenic diet, whether it be by doing some fasting, or it's just by introducing low glycemic carbs instead of high glycemic carbs, you're going to be in a better situation from a visceral fat standpoint. Take a look at this study. So this study was published in the Journal of Obesity. It took a look at 69 diabetic and overweight patients. Okay, very simply put, they had them all go on a eucaloric diet, which means they ate the same amount of calories. The only thing that was different between them is for 8 weeks, one group ate a high glycemic diet and another group ate a low glycemic carbohydrate diet. Well, neither group lost all that much weight. So at first glance, you're like, all right, neither diet really worked. But the group that ate the low glycemic carbohydrates lost 10.9% visceral fat, whereas the group that consumed the same amount of calories but via high glycemic carbs gained 1.3% visceral fat. Okay, if that doesn't prove that a calorie is just a calorie is wrong, I don't know what will. A calorie is not just a calorie. Clearly, a low glycemic carbohydrate didn't affect what we know is inflammatory visceral fat compared to high glycemic carbs, clearly adding inflammatory visceral fat. So anyhow, let's move on to the next little trick, limiting fructose. Okay, fructose is the sugar that comes from fruit. And am I saying you shouldn't eat fruit? No, fruit is fine, okay, just in moderation. I usually recommend not having more than like 40 to 50 grams of fructose per day. Different if you're on keto, but just in general. See, fructose can only get metabolized in the liver, which means that it overloads the liver quickly. And it goes through what's called de novo lipogenesis if we have too much. De novo lipogenesis is where sugar gets converted into fat, particularly fructose. Well, guess what? The liver is in our abdominal cavity. So if it gets converted into fat, where is it going to get deposited? It's going to get deposited right in our abdominal cavity as, you guessed it, visceral fat. So an interesting study that was published in the Journal of Gastroenterology took a look at 49 overweight children in this case, and it put them on a limited fructose diet for 9 days. Okay, so about a week and a half. Well, what they found is after just a week and a half, these subjects reduced their visceral fat content by 13 cubic centimeters. That's a week and a half, and they're already reducing that much. Now, they actually lost more visceral adipose tissue than they did subcutaneous tissue. So again, at first glance, people might think, no, they didn't lose that much, but they actually lost a significant amount of fat. They just lost it in the harmful visceral fat form, which is what we want to get rid of. So it's not always about what you are seeing on the scale or what you're seeing in the mirror. If you're making healthier choices, you're probably improving your health. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that. Now, here's an interesting one for those of you that are vitamin junkies. Vitamin D might be something that's going to help you out with your visceral fat levels. Yeah, so the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition published an interesting study. This one took a look at test subjects that consumed 100 IUs of vitamin D alongside calcium-fortified orange juice. Yes, pure fructose, actually, kind of ironic, okay, compared to subjects that didn't have the vitamin D. Well, they found the subjects that had the vitamin D had a decrease in their visceral fat levels. Now, the interesting thing is that these were subjects that were deficient in vitamin D. So, full disclaimer, if you have adequate amounts of vitamin D, this may not have the same effect. But 77% of Americans are deficient in vitamin D, so there's a good chance you're going to get a positive effect on your visceral fat if you do take in some vitamin D. It's just something to consider when you're looking at the vitamin shelf. All right, then we have to look at this very important one, which is fasting. Fasting, whether it's 18 hours or whether it's 72 hours, has some powerful effects when it comes down to the utilization of visceral fat. Fasting preferentially runs on visceral fat. It's a brown form of fat. So even though it's not a good fat, it's still a brown fat that contributes to energy when we're fasting. Now, there's been some studies that have shown that fasting actually recruits white adipose tissue, which is like our sub-Q tissue, into visceral fat and then burns it. That sounds kind of weird, right? Like, we don't want visceral fat to be there, but it's kind of a staging area for fasting. So the long and the short of it is this: intermittent fasting indirectly burns up visceral fat. It's a great way to reduce visceral fat. It's a great way to reduce fat in general. And in fact, it's going to burn them both at about the same rate from what I've seen in the way of research. So it's pretty wild stuff. Now, I will say, if you're someone that's trying to make some of these healthier decisions, you may want to check out Thrive Market. So I put a link down below to Thrive Market because I've been able to create keto and fasting grocery boxes through Thrive. Now, they're a huge sponsor of this channel and they're awesome, but at the same time, I've been able to create grocery boxes for people. That's really convenient, right? So if you're trying to do intermittent fasting, you don't know where to start, you want to be able to get the right foods for when you do break your fast, I highly recommend that you check out my fasting bundle with Thrive Marketplace. So that way you don't have to, I don't know, go to the grocery store and just aimlessly walk around hoping that you can get what I would generally recommend. So again, they're an online membership-based grocery store that makes shopping super, super easy and quite frankly easier than the grocery store. So link down below in the description after you watch this video. Okay, now I've got one more really interesting one to talk about. Okay, LRP5 loss of function. This is known as an LDL receptor. So it's a specific LDL receptor related protein. Now, this is complicated, but I'm going to make it very simple. This LRP5 is involved in bone density, but it's also involved in fat mass distribution. So the study that was published in the journal Cell Metabolism that specifically looks at LRP5 found some interesting results. Okay, so they looked at test subjects that had a loss of function with LRP5, and one of the things that they did find was that on average they had a higher waist to hip ratio. Now, it didn't directly say that loss of function with LRP5 would have an effect on visceral fat, but by default, if you have an increase in the waist to hip ratio, you generally are looking at an increase in visceral fat. Now, I have another case study to add to this to kind of connect the dots. You might be wondering what the heck I'm even talking about. The point is, with LRP5, you could have an LRP5 loss of function and not know it, and that would mean that your body is going to distribute fat unevenly, even if you're perfectly healthy. So I have a quick solution for you, just hang tight. Okay, so there's one particular case study, and this case study was published in the Frontiers of Endocrinology. I want you to take a look at the picture that's on the screen right now, okay, and tell me what body fat percentage you think this person is. Well, guess what? Their body fat percentage as measured by calipers isn't even measurable. It's that lean. But when this subject went over to do a DEXA scan, he was 16% body fat, indicating that he clearly had a high degree of visceral fat. It wasn't visible, but he had a lot of body fat. It was just visceral, so it wasn't seen. Well, guess what? This test subject has the LRP5 loss of function, which means that his body isn't really receiving the cholesterols right. Long story short, he has this loss of function that I'm talking about. And he has high levels of visceral fat. So we have to connect the dots of these two studies that show that a loss of function with LRP5 could very well indicate that you're going to store fat as visceral fat much easier. So what is the solution? Well, research shows that low-dose lithium orotate, yes, the same thing that is prescribed in higher doses for anxiety and depression, can be used to improve the function of the LRP5 and the downstream WNT signaling pathway. This is all very complicated, and if you're a science nerd, you're digging this. If you're not, you're totally lost and you can probably turn off the video. Simple point is, if you get over-the-counter online like 5 milligram dose of lithium, you can have a pretty solid improvement that's LRP5. Now the problem is you have to go and get some blood testing to see if you even have that issue, but long story short, just an interesting bonus. So as always, please do keep it locked in here on my channel. If you want me to expand on any more of this nerdy stuff with LRP5 or anything like that, put it down below in the comment section. And please don't forget to check out Thrive Market because they do make this channel possible. Thank you again. I'll see you in the next video.